The Batman is absolutely amazing. A neo-noir that borrows and follows in the footsteps of other classics in its genre, and yes, The Batman is going to be a classic, people. It's an absolute banger. This film hits all the notes, slams it home with an old-school rock and roll breakdown, and yep, the music score is pitch perfect too. I was smiling from ear to ear during multiple moments throughout this movie, from start to finish, legitimate joy. This movie's dark as hell. Its villain legitimately frightening at times, and it overall simply means business. It's a perfect example of how to do things right with modern cinema storytelling with big IP. Movies today have a difficult task from the get-go because there are only 7 types of stories to tell. And they've been told countless times already over the past 100 years of filmmaking, so we have to find new ways to tell the same story. Some can't pull it off, others can. The movie borrows heavily from Seven, Chinatown, and Zodiac, and the opening act feels like Sin City except done well and not a pile of shit. Pattinson's in his batsuit for like 90% of his screen time? God damn! And the movie elegantly slams together aesthetics from multiple Batman sources. Year One for the look and color palette of the film, and Gotham by Gaslight and Arkham Origins for the suit. And if we're not letting nostalgia blind us, Pattinson's the best Batman, period. I might give you Michael Keaton because he's just fantastic, but nah, if you argue otherwise, you're full of doo-doo butter. Zoe Kravitz is fantastic as Catwoman, Paul Dano is terrifying as Riddler, and Colin Farrell is unrecognizable, and he absolutely kills it as Penguin. They all kill it. The movie's short on action, and that's actually ideal because when it does happen, it's that much more impactful. Matt Reeves' steady camera work destroys Christopher Nolan's choppiness. And just when I thought I was going to get a ho-hum third act, nope, completely subverts my expectations and keeps some real genuine surprises and actual character growth. The surprises will get you clapping like a white family when the plane lands. And now a quick synopsis before we dive balls deep into all this. GG's only, boys. We skip the origin of the hero, but start early in Batman's career, year 2 specifically. Bats already has an established relationship with Gordon and an uneasy alliance with the police as he tries to clean up Gotham with a vengeance. He's a younger, angry Batman, one who seems like he can be pushed to the edge at any moment. Gordon and Bats are drawn into a game of catch the killer, with a new sadistic menace calling himself the Riddler, who's killing Gotham's elite. The trail of victims leads Batman and Gordon to face the corruption rooted deep in the heart of Gotham, with uneasy alliances and a whole lot of revelations along the way. How many stories do you think have been told in recorded human history? If you said a shitload, that's an acceptable answer. We also accept a shit ton, assload, more than your mother weighs, and if you're a real smartass, all of them works as an answer too. So how does one still write a compelling story? The mixing and matching of genres, that's how. There is the fact that, yes, stories are retold and newer generations are viewing these newer versions of tried and true stories, thus giving old ideas new life again. That's true. But to create something refreshing for larger consumption, mix those styles, bye. I mean, hip-hop artists use samples of older songs from different genres, remix them and make them fresh and new again. Mixing and matching can be key to finding something different, to subvert expectations enough to make something refreshing, something elite even. Sometimes it's done so well, it can become an instant classic despite the uphill battle. Now you might say, movie shittick. Give me some example then, you prick. Here you go, GG's only, boys. A number of superhero movies of the past decade have had success taking the title character into different film genres. Captain America: The Winter Soldier was a spy thriller taking from the Bourne movies. The first Cap and the first Wonder Woman were war epics taking the best elements of films like Saving Private Ryan. Black Widow was, well, also a spy thriller in the vein of the Jason Bourne movies. Joker was a throwback to movies like Scorsese and De Niro's Taxi Driver and King of Comedy. Now, what these movies had in common was that their characters were more grounded in reality. Superheroes, yeah, or supervillain, but more like a human being than the gods they would fight alongside, or against. This makes them ideal for grounded, more human stories. Since Batman joins that club of non-superpowered superheroes, he's always been the best fit for that style. He doesn't just join the club, he leads it. We didn't think it could get darker than the Dark Knight trilogy, but man, we were wrong. The Batman's genre of choice is noir, and it cranks it up to 11. Besides The Long Halloween and Batman Earth 1 as obvious comic inspiration, from my view, its primary inspirations are the Jack Nicholson classic Chinatown, where Nicholson plays a private eye investigating an infidelity case that leads to a murder mystery in a much larger conspiracy in 1930s Los Angeles. Zodiac by David Fincher, the film based on the infamous real-world serial killer of the same name, and the biggest of them all, David Fincher's own noir classic Seven, where Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman play detectives tracking a serial killer whose increasingly gruesome murders befall victims he thinks are responsible for one of the 7 deadly sins. As mentioned in the intro, one could even argue that Jeffrey Wright's James Gordon is the Batman as Morgan Freeman's Detective Somerset is to Brad Pitt's Detective Mills. Since we start with a younger Batman, he has more brooding and raging to do, something Brad Pitt's younger detective proves to Freeman's more reserved elder statesman who's the voice of reason, which Gordon becomes for Bats throughout the movie. The parallels don't end there. Most noir films are dark, but Matt Reeves takes a lot of the aesthetic that Seven had and molds it into the superhero fold. There's a sense of dread permeating this entire movie, a similar feeling we got while watching Seven. The setup is similar too, with our duo of Gordon and Batman investigating homicide crime scenes that grow increasingly brutal in nature. For a PG-13 movie, we not only get the one allotted F-bomb that's perfectly timed to let you know this movie isn't fucking around, and yeah, you'll get a lot more F-bombs around here, that's for sure. But we get an opening that's pretty damn disturbing in its brutality. The killers, Riddler here and John Doe in Seven, are similar in nature, although the Batman introduces some pretty horrifying elements that bring it past the thriller genre and takes inspiration from the horror genre. There are some elements of Saw in place that will make you genuinely uncomfortable. The Zodiac Killer was not only a visual inspiration for this new Riddler, but the story elements too. The Zodiac was an inspiration for John Doe in Seven, but here it's done in its own interesting way because it suits the Riddler so well. With ciphers and puzzles to be decoded by the Batman, much like the Zodiac Killer himself left the police in the 1960s. What better way to ground a typically visually goofy villain than to find what could essentially be what is the closest to his real-world counterpart? Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Now we get to the fun part for me. Pooping on Zack Snyder. I can't help but compare the Batman to Snyder's DC movies because they're its immediate predecessors. I'll get to The Dark Knight, but I hold that movie in the highest regard, so let's juxtapose good writing with bad, shall we? Here's an example. More GGs, boys, let's go. Alluded to at the beginning of this analysis was the intros to both the Batman and Batman vs. Superman are similar because Bruce Wayne narrates during the opening of both films. And again, for some reason, one works extremely well while the other one is total shit. These are the only sections in both movies where there is any narration at all, so why is it that one works and one doesn't? I gave it some thought. The Batman, as mentioned, is a noir film, and opening narration by the protagonist is extremely typical of the genre, particularly the early films of its type. This means it's following Matt Reeves' plan to a T, embracing the genre it's being dipped into, all the way down to a detail like opening narration, something a true crime throwback would do. It makes perfect sense to do it here. Not only is it almost a requirement of a good noir movie, in context of the story, it's Bruce Wayne writing in his journal. So we have both an external and internal reason to have it in the movie. Oh, I fucking love this shit. It's almost like Rorschach in Watchmen, whose character is almost a throwback to noir archetypes. And no, I'm not giving credit to Snyder for having that in his adaptation of Watchmen. It was written for him by a much more talented writer, while Reeves is like a one-man band sometimes. Meanwhile, in shitty movie land, we have Batman vs. Superman's opening scene that rehashes Batman's origin being narrated by Bruce Wayne from the modern day. Why does this feel self-indulgent? Because it absolutely is. And it's lazy, which might be an even bigger offense than simple arrogance on behalf of the director. Narration isn't specific to noir, but nowhere else in his trilogy of DC movies does he have any narration. It's completely out of place, it simply does not fit, and the only reason there's narration is because Snyder just needed to do his version of Batman's origin. Even though there was a collective groan by the fan base when it was announced that he was doing it again. It was more of his self-indulgent, self-important bullshit, full of slow-mo and close-up shots of this and that, shit that pretty simply does not matter whatsoever. As far as origins go for the Batman, it skips it completely, but that doesn't mean it leaves Bruce Wayne's past hanging. It's incredibly important to the overall narrative. Besides the fact that the audience didn't need yet another redo of the origin, it is a fact that we want to know how his past impacts the character we're seeing on screen. Reeves does this splendidly with the pivotal funeral scene in the film, and it's in the trailer, so don't get upset about a spoiler. Bruce sees the son of the man in the casket. It's not the focus of the scene, but its subtlety is there, and even subconsciously felt. I didn't realize this until a good friend brought it up, but Bruce recognizes and sees himself in the young man who just lost his parent, and that's why, when he has a chance to catch one of the villains, he instead stays to save the child.
I fucking love this.
Snyder absolutely could have done something like this with BVS. That movie opens with an admittedly good scene of Bruce Wayne trying to save people from the collapse of one of his towers as Superman battles Zod. He easily could have had a follow-up scene of a funeral for one of his now deceased employees, a victim of the carelessness of Superman's battle. He could have essentially had this same scene, but swap out the culprit for the murder to Superman. Snyder did try something close to it with Bruce comforting a child at the end of the scene, but it wasn't connected to Wayne's past, it was just happening. I was reminded recently that subtlety isn't easy to do. I guess Snyder knows this and just gave up on trying. After all, he is the most on-the-nose, unsubtle director I've ever seen, so speaking of directing, Matt Reeves knows how to make a goddamn movie. I don't think the guy has made a bad or mediocre movie yet in his career, and my high hopes were met here. Again, as a franchise with multiple iterations, I can't help but compare, so let's just get to it and break down a few observations. I mentioned in the intro that Matt Reeves has a steady hand with action. Turns out, I still agree with myself. While I absolutely love The Dark Knight, maybe not the whole trilogy, but The Dark Knight specifically, the action scenes can be pretty hard to follow. A lot of that is Nolan's decision on edits. He is the director after all, and he has final say on how the film looks, so no matter who the editor is, Nolan is the last line of defense. This is just his style, unfortunately, and while he's a true auteur and a brilliant filmmaker, he definitely has some weaknesses, action scenes being one. They're just unbelievably choppy and almost nauseating to watch. It must be sad for the fight choreographers to watch their hard work get turned into a muddled pile of shit. While Nolan's dialogue can be hammy at times, his biggest issue is action. Meanwhile, Reeves' camera work and editing is completely still, or moves gracefully following the action. He captures it all on the screen for you to enjoy and follow without any issue at all, and it allows you to take in just how unbelievably badass Batman is. His shots have grace to them, and you know exactly what's going on at all times. And I'll even give this to Snyder. His action scenes, while, again, self-indulgent, are at least easy to follow, have a good sense of space, and, if not for the goddamn slow-mo, can be exciting. Hilariously and ironically, the best action scene in any of his movies is the warehouse fight in Batman vs. Superman. But it was his second unit that directed it. It lacked any slow-mo and was straight up badass. Too bad he didn't even do it. Back to Nolan and The Dark Knight, I love the tunnel chase. It's iconic, but it's edited so poorly you get no sense of where anyone is at all. Look at this truck take a hit from the left and go spiraling to the right. What the fuck? I watched a video recently where a professional film editor fixed this scene and I was blown away. It's all there. It can make sense. You just need someone who wants to give it that kind of care. Meanwhile, Reeves' chase scene with his Batmobile barreling down on the Penguin is unbelievably gripping. It's fast-paced but easy to understand at the same time, which means we can sit back and really enjoy it. After all, Reeves made the Batmobile in this an actual fucking character. It's like a monster Batman had been hiding until he needed to unleash it. And the entire audience I watched it with, myself included of course, were squealing in excitement. Simply amazing. It also has the one use of slow-mo that I remember when Batman is walking towards the Penguin. Again, this is in the trailers, making the slow motion incredibly impactful because of its extremely rare and minimal use. Compare that with Snyder's DC movies, and holy shit, do you see the self-indulgence. I've used that description a few times, but there's just a limited number of ways to describe this man. Zack Snyder loves himself some Zack Snyder. I mean, even optically, this dude needs things to look epic without putting any effort into the right areas. His movies just have to be barely over 3 hours, or barely over 4 hours, because man oh man, does that mean this movie is epic. Never mind worrying about execution, it's all about the optics. Yet if you remove all the unnecessary slow-mo in his Justice League, the movie would go from 4 hours to 3. Get the fuck out of here. My last point for this video I wanted to touch on was the music and how well it's utilized. The way the score and soundtrack are used brings the entire movie together full circle. The synergy between the writing, the acting, the directing, the cinematography, the editing, and the music is just...
Oh, I fucking love this!
But Cynic, again, what the hell do you mean? Alright, let's go. GG's only, boys. Batman's theme is simple and elegant. It's inspired by Something in the Way by Nirvana. You know, the transcendent, fucking amazing band that wrote simple tunes but completely smashed barriers and changed the music industry. What else was inspired by Nirvana in this movie? Pattinson based a lot of his take on Batman on Kurt Cobain. Know who else used some of that band's energy in his performance? Paul Dano. He recently stated that Nirvana guided his take on the Riddler. Know what song was played during the movie in the appropriate scenes? Something in the Way by Nirvana. Grunge band, dirty, the antithesis of the contemporary pop musicians. Pattinson's Bruce Wayne, dirty, grungy, drab, and gaunt when outside the mask. Haunting and beautiful when in it. Gotham City has a look unlike any kind we've seen since Batman '89. It's like a character in itself, and the color palette for the film is equal parts haunting and grimy too. Reeves and his composer finished up Batman's theme before the first teaser was even released. They've stated it was used alongside filming for true synergistic mood setting. Out-fucking-standing stuff. The Batman is a goddamn masterpiece. It's a masterclass in filmmaking, and it won't be forgotten, but it will be imitated by future films. And round we go, right? It takes from the best of its past, the best of the noir genre, and creates something new by twisting what was old. And other movies will try and do the same thing because of the Batman in the future. The cycle will continue, but might not always produce a result as good as this film. As a side note, Pattinson looks so good in the Batsuit, I almost literally can't even. Him and Zoe Kravitz make a smoldering on-screen couple, and Pattinson is a goddamn beautiful man. And that jawline? You don't know it's something that's that important until you see it look that good. I just want to grab him by it and just scream, "Oh, I fucking love you!" Look, you've heard my praises. If you disagree, hey, it's okay to be wrong. Nah, I'm just playing. I'd love to hear counterpoints. It's what makes film discussion so damn fun. I appreciate the watch, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. Until next time, GG's only.